Earlier tonight in Moscow, Vladimir Putin made what appeared to be a pretty direct threat to the United States that he would destroy our country if his country was ever attacked with nuclear weapons. If so, it is the most bold and direct and aggressive statement that Putin has made really to date. So far, anytime he's mentioned nuclear weapons, it's kind of been around the edges and been kind of an indirect way. But well, I'll let you see for yourself. Here's him speaking earlier today in Russian with English subtitles.
Ответ является абсолютно неприемлемым для любого потенциального агрессора. Потому что с момента обнаружения старта ракет, откуда бы это ни исходило, из любой точки Мирового океана, либо с какой бы то ни было территории, в ответ на встречном ударе в воздухе появляется такое количество, столько сотен наших ракет, что шансов на выживание ни у одного противника не останется. Причем сразу на нескольких направлениях.
Now the question has to be, what should the United States do about this? What should be our reaction to it? Well, I can tell you a couple of different reactions that are virtually guaranteed to happen, and most likely are going to come at the top. The first one is our arrogance and our pride is going to say, "Oh yeah, you can't threaten me with nuclear war. I'll threaten you with nuclear war." And certainly, there's already many in the West and in the United States in particular, especially among a lot of the retired generals, have actually been saying that kind of very thing that since this began, that Putin would never do that. It's just a bunch of bluster. He doesn't mean it because he knows that we would retaliate. But now it sounds like that Putin is actually telling us the same thing with growing confidence that if you ever try and launch weapons against us, we will destroy your company. Now, I said that was one direction. Here's the second thing we can have, and we've already seen it. And this clip from CNN is very illustrative of, I think, what you're going to see a lot in the United States.
This was a multi-hour rant, frankly, in front of an audience of invited guests at a discussion forum near Moscow, in which he railed Vladimir Putin about the various offences that have been committed, in his eyes, by the West against Russia. He accused the West of playing a dangerous, bloody and dirty game around the world, as we heard in that previous report. And he also said that what we're on the brink of right now, and this has been borne out, I suppose, by events that he has unleashed, is a very dangerous period to come. Take a listen to what the Russian president had to say this time in Moscow.
We are standing at a historical frontier. Ahead is the most dangerous, unpredictable, and at the same time the most important decade since the end of World War II.
Now, let's just review the bidding here for a second, if we will. Now, that report, you can hear the attitude in the reporter's discussion that it's very dismissive of Putin. It's like, well, what he said and his view on things, as though it has no validity, because the president of Russia is the one saying it, it's invalid, and all of his positions are invalid. And the implication being that he doesn't really mean what he says, though he's a little bit, kind of crazy, maybe a little bit off kilter, but, he doesn't have any valid positions. Now, if we act on that and we continue to say, yeah, I don't care about red lines, they don't matter, we're going to keep doing whatever we want, and he's just going to have to toughen up because he doesn't mean that anyway. He's not going to actually use nuclear weapons because he knows if he does, there's going to be an overwhelming response and a retaliation. And certainly that's true on the surface of it. But look, consider this. Putin was saying since 2008, he was very clear on this and continued to reiterate it many times. If NATO brought its military alliance up to his border in Ukraine, that he could potentially use force to reverse that. He demonstrated it also in 2008 in Georgia, where he had limited use of force to keep Georgia out of Ukraine. Then when it got into 2021, and again, you had the West saying, hey, we are standing by the 2008 Bucharest Agreement, which said that Ukraine will be in NATO at some point. And they emphatically reiterated that. We had Stoltenberg, who said in September that Putin apparently privately behind the scenes told him, if you don't take NATO off the table, we're going to invade. And they said, we're not going to sign that. We're not going to do it. We're going to ignore what Putin says. And then, of course, we know he actually took that action. So he was signaling for many, many years that there was a red line. Now, some of their red lines haven't materialized, as we've seen with many of these weapon systems that we've given, and there's been no reaction. So the propensity among many in the West is to say, well, there are no red lines. Ergo, we can do whatever we want. We can safely ignore anything Putin says. But now listen, this has nothing to do with taking Putin's side. This has nothing to do with giving any credibility or justification of what they're doing. I'm giving none of that. Vladimir Putin attacked Ukraine when there were other options short of war to meet their security interests. They had some. He was warning about what would happen, but he didn't have to take lethal military action at that time. That was, by definition, a war of choice, and he chose to do that. So this is no defense of Vladimir Putin. What this very much is, however, is a warning to us in the West that this man has proven that his warnings have materialized. He actually specifically said in 2021 that if you don't take NATO off this table, and this is publicly, that they're going to take military technical responses to this. So he actually told you what he was going to do. He had the forces there. We knew what that was going to be. And then he actually used them in February 2022, as is now well known and well chronicled. Now, when you hear him now increasing and more boldly saying that if we're ever attacked, now he didn't specify with a nuclear attack. The assumption is that's what he meant. But does he mean that? What if we actually use some of these long-range cruise missiles or some of these ATACMS that the United States is apparently going to provide? What if those are used to attack targets inside of Russia, even though that we've told Ukraine not to do it? What if they do it anyway? We don't know. We don't know what Putin would do, but we are playing a dangerous, dangerous game with our own security if we continue to say he doesn't mean what he says. He's just blowing a bunch of smoke and we don't have to worry. We're not going to be, what's the word I hear? Self-deterred. Look, that is one of the most absurd things that you can say. It's like if somebody has a gun and they're holding it on a hostage and they have a history of using that weapon on a hostage and they say, don't come any closer or I'll shoot. And you say, I don't care, but I dare you, shoot anyway. And you keep coming and he shoots the victim. Well, now the guy who pulled the trigger is 100% in the wrong. He's the one who pulled the trigger. But how foolish is it to ignore a known violent criminal who's scared and warning that he's going to do something and then just blithely go forward anyway? Now the victim is shot and now the guy's even more dangerous than he was before. We have a similar situation with that now. Putin has already done that once. He's already pulled the trigger once. And we are playing, forgive the pun, but it's so appropriate here, Russian roulette to continue to say that there will never be a red line. We can do whatever we want, and Putin won't ever do anything because he knows that we're going to do something in retaliation. Because just imagine if that does happen. You know what? He's probably right. If Putin ever uses nuclear weapons almost anywhere, the chances of a response is almost guaranteed. Because what president is going to be able to absorb a nuclear blast and not return it? And then, of course, no better, if anyone is foolish enough to think that one retaliation will then stop Putin and he'll back down, you are a foolish man. Let me just bluntly say that. Anyone who believes that is a foolish man because you're playing with all of our lives. All of our lives. If you keep pushing beyond what, and we don't know where the line is, but where Putin is going to finally do something foolish and that we consider foolish. And now then we're in a situation where we either have to escalate into nuclear weapons or back down. And the amount of casualties that could come from that, American cities could burn, and we are playing with that for no reason. There is nothing at stake in our national security. As I've been saying from the beginning, Russia has no conventional capacity to roll anywhere. They can't even take care of the one country on their border. They certainly aren't going to roll conventionally into a 32-member alliance that they know they can't stop. The one thing they can do, though, is they do have enough nuclear weapons to fry the planet. They could literally, they're the only ones on the planet that could literally wipe out America in the worst case scenario. Why in God's name would we want to even play with that possibility? Russia can be contained where they are. They are self-contained. They can't go any further. We can prevent this from going into NATO. We have all of our NATO forces all along the eastern flank. And if they did attempt anything, we would meet them with overwhelming power. It's there right now. He is contained and he won't go any further. And our security doesn't have to suffer as long as we don't get foolish in what we're doing and take unnecessary risks that have no upside, but catastrophe, destructive downside. Now, I'll finish with this reiteration because it's an important point. This is no defense of anything Vladimir Putin has done because he is guilty of many things. But this is a warning to us in the West not to let arrogance drive us into making foolish decisions that could push Putin into a position to where he makes good on some of his foolish threats. That's something we need to keep in mind. Our national security, our lives could be in this, or could be at stake here. We need to do what's right here. That's all we have for you tonight. We'll see you in the next episode.